Howdy guys, Cal Kellogg here. Welcome back to the channel. If you're not already a subscriber, help me out. Hit that subscribe button down there, hit that bell notification, and then you'll always know when I'm here on YouTube talking about fishing tactics. And today we are going to talk about one of Northern California's most beloved game fish, the striped bass. How to catch stripers in the Delta. It's mid-August, it's hot as a $2 pistol, and stripers are back in the Delta, and it happens every year at this time. You know, you'll get some pretty good fishing in August, you'll have some ups and downs, and then by the time we get into the latter part of September, October, fishing is very solid. We know at a minimum we're going to have good striper fishing up until, you know, mid-December probably, and if conditions hold out, if the river doesn't completely blow out, we could have good fishing all winter long. My personal best Delta striper was a 28-pounder. Caught it on February 12th with the great Mark Wilson. He was running the boat. We were trolling, and we had decent water conditions. It was muddy, but it wasn't blowing out. And that year, we had very good fishing right on through the winter. So let's jump into it. Some poor guys down here putting a roof on a house. That must be joyous out there in the sun. Poor guys. I'd rather be up here under my umbrella. But anyway, let's get into it. You know, I know from my 16 years at the helm of the Fish Sniffer, there is a ton of interest in striper fishing throughout Northern California, and especially in the Sacramento region. The problem is there's a lot of guys that would like to get their striper on, but they don't really know how to do it, and there is a hard divide out in the Delta. Probably 10 or 15% of the anglers catch the vast majority of the stripers just because they understand the basic rules of the fishery, how to rig up, how to present their baits, and how to execute. And I'm going to break it all down for you really fast here today. Take notes, you know, refer back to this, because I'm going to give you the formulas. I'm going to give you the basic approaches on tackle, lures, baits, the whole deal. I'm going to talk fast. Here we go. Let's dive in. There are two basic ways for the average guy to catch stripers in the Delta: trolling and bait fishing. Anytime the water is above about, 52 degrees or so, trolling is a viable option. Bait fishing works in too, but if you want to troll, make sure that water's above about 52, 56 is better. That's when the fish are really active enough to chase. That's when we have the really good trolling. When that water's anywhere from 56 to 68, very good trolling conditions. So let's start out with trolling. We'll segue into bait fishing after that. You can use the same rod and reel combination for both trolling and bait fishing. Here we go. This is my striper halibut salmon rod, 7 foot 6 inches long. I designed it specifically for Northern California fishing, Delta striper trolling, Delta bait fishing. Here's what you're looking for in a rod. I don't care if you run my rod or another rod. You're looking for a rod that's about 7 foot to 8 feet long. This rod's 7 foot 6. You need some backbone. In the middle, you need some backbone. But out here on the tip, you need to have some action for a couple reasons. One, you just want some action in the rod to cushion the fight of a striper. But if you're trolling, you're also going to rely on the action in the tip of that rod to tell you if your lure has picked up grass. And if you're trolling around with a big clump of grass on, you're not going to catch anything. And there's a lot of grass out there early in the season before the water gets cool and the grass kind of clears out. So you want a rod with a sensitive enough tip that you can see that plug down there working, but you need enough backbone to handle a big striper. You need enough backbone to handle the pull of the plugs or the weight of a sinker if you're going to do some bait fishing later on in the season. You want to balance that rod. I should say right now, I am running a killer special on these rods right now. Stripers are in the system. Salmon are coming. Pick up one of these rods in the fishhuntshoot.com store, and we will throw in a P-line Predator striper plug and a Quick Fish salmon plug absolutely free of charge. We'll drop them in with your rod. You will be armed for salmon, you will be armed for stripers, and you will have the #1 striper, salmon, and halibut rod in Northern California. 3 years research and development went into this rod, guys. I've fished for everything. I've caught everything. This is the rod you need if you're going to target those species in Northern California. Enough said, let's get into it. You want to balance your rod with a level wind reel, and you want to spool that reel with braided line. It helps to have a line counter. Not essential, but it sure helps, okay? This reel right here is spooled with 30-pound braid. It's a little light for me. I can break the line if I thumb it and set the hook on 30-pound braid, because there's very little stretch in it, and I tend to get a little bit excited. So I like to go anywhere from 40 to 65 pound tests. That's your preference, but I strongly recommend that you spool up with braid. It lasts for a long time, very little stretch, super sensitive. It's the stuff you want to be using. It's 2022, spool up with braid, okay? So for trolling, here's how you want to rig up. We'll get into the lures in a second. I just want to show you the basic rig. Your main line right there, your main line comes down to a swivel or a snap swivel. Attached to that, I have some 25-pound P-line CXX copolymer line. You don't need fluorocarbon. I either use the P-line CXX or the Trilene Big Game line. They are exceptionally tough lines. If you get tangled, if you get in some rocks, you're probably not going to get cut off with those lines. And they have a little bit of stretch in them too, so you got a little bit of insurance there in terms of stretch, okay? Before I move on to the end tackle here, I should say you don't need a huge reel when you're striper fishing. Stripers, even big stripers, they tend not to make big long runs. They tend to bulldog. They're very strong, but they're not albacore. 200 yards of line capacity, that's plenty for even the biggest Delta striper. Back to the trolling tackle, back to the end tackle. So main line down to a swivel or a snap swivel, a 25-pound copolymer leader. You want to run that leader anywhere from 36 to about 40 inches long, and you want to tip that leader with a lock snap. Not a snap swivel, a lock snap. That's where you're going to put your lures on. So what are you going to run on this? What speeds are you going to run, and how far back are you going to put the lures behind the boat? And this is a sticky point for a lot of guys. This is where a lot of guys get into trouble, okay? 3 basic lures you're going to want to run out there in the Delta, all right? You're going to want to run a minnow plug. This is a Yo-Zuri Crystal minnow, and this happens to be my favorite Delta striper plug. It is a bone white, shallow running Yo-Zuri Crystal minnow right there. You want some shallow runners, you want some deep runners. If you want to use the P-line products, the Angry Eye is the shallow runner, the Predator is the deep runner. They run at the same depth. They have basically the same action as the Yo-Zuri Crystal minnows. The P-line plugs are a little bit cheaper, and to me, it performed just as well, but I do have a bunch of Yo-Zuris, and I absolutely love that white on white one right there. Now, when you're using a minnow plug, you're gonna tip the plug with a worm, but before I show you how to do that properly, let's talk about setbacks, speed, and depth, okay? When you're trolling with minnow plugs, you're looking for fish in one of 2 depth ranges. You're looking for fish holding in 5 to 8 feet of water. You're gonna target those with the shallow runner. And you're looking for fish holding anywhere from about 11 to 16 feet deep. Target those fish with the deep runner. When you're running your shallow runner, you wanna be going 5 miles an hour, and you want that plug 130 feet behind the boat, okay? That's gonna put you in that 5 to 8 foot strike zone. If the water's a little shallow and you're hitting the bottom, shorten up a little bit. But your basic recipe, 5 miles an hour, 130 feet back, okay? If you're running the deep runner, it's got a much bigger bill on it. I don't have one here in front of me. You want to cut your speed back to about 3 miles an hour and shorten that setback back to 100 feet. If you hit the bottom, shorten up. If you're in much more than 16 feet of water, you can't get deep enough with that plug, so move in shallower. So those are your 2 depth ranges, those are your setbacks, those are your speeds. Now, if you're hitting fish in really shallow water, say water that's 8 feet or less, a big vibrating crankbait like that is a very viable option. Not enough guys run these out in the Delta. 1/2 ounces are great, 3/4 ounces are better, 1 ounces are the bomb. Run that anywhere from 3 to 5 miles an hour in shallow water. It's got the shad profile. They absolutely love it. Light colors work great. You can mix in some crawdad colors too, but I like the metallic, metallic silver with blue back, black back, pearl white. You're trying to imitate a shad. It's got the right profile, makes a ton of noise. The stripers are shallow, they're aggressive, they're feeding. They're gonna jump all over that. No worm on this, just run it just like that. So let's get into this worm. This confuses a lot of guys, okay? first thing you want to do when you put the worm on your plug, and what this does, it just gives that plug a bigger profile. It gives it more action, and it's the way we've been doing it in the Delta forever, and it flat out works. But I'll see a lot of guys that are like, man, I got my worm on there, and it just doesn't seem to be working for me, and I got the worm on, and I don't understand what's wrong. Well, it looks like hell. That's what's wrong. Here's how you put a worm on your hook properly, okay? And you could put a little crazy glue on here too, and it'll help it hold much better. Take your plug, hold your plug up like that. You're gonna notice that there's one hook point that lines up, just kind of naturally lines up with the center point of the plug. Usually it's on top, but not always, okay? So figure out which hook lines up best with the center point of the plug, and in this case, it's this one right here, okay? So that right there is where we're gonna put the worm. Now, I want this worm, if you look at a Trix worm, or a trick worm rather, it's flat on the bottom. See, the bottom is flat, okay? So we want that flat part of the worm corresponding with the bottom of the plug. So we're gonna take our hook point. We're only gonna go in about 1/4 of an inch into the worm. We're gonna take the worm like that. I got the flat side over here because I'm gonna roll it back over. I'm gonna stick it in there. I'm gonna work it down, work it, right to there. That's it, okay? Not anymore. You don't need insurance. At this point, I would put some crazy glue right there, pop that hook point out of there, and bring it right around and shove it right up in to that gap, just like that. That is it. Flat side of the worm is corresponding with the bottom of the plug. You're gonna have outstanding action on that. It's gonna flat out work. Pin a worm like that on your deep runners and on your shallow runners. White, it's most consistent. You can play with pink, you can play with chartreuse. I've had good luck on red. Honestly, not sure color matters, but the tried and true traditional color is that 8-inch white trick worm. Other brands will work, but the trick worm is tough. It's durable. They can hit it quite a few times and it'll stay on there pretty well, especially if you put that crazy glue on there. So when you get that in the water, it's just gonna have a lot of action, a lot of swimming action, and it flat out works, guys. That's how you put a worm on a minnow plug when you're trolling for stripers in the Delta, all right? Now let's move on to bait fishing. Now I would use the same, got that hooked up in the chair there. I would use the same rod. I would use my SHS trigger stick rod, whether I was trolling or bait fishing. If you're gonna bait fish, it's important that you have a reel that has a clicker, because when you put your rod in the holder, you wanna put the clicker on like that, but you wanna leave the reel out of gear, because when that striper picks up that bait, and we're going to talk about baits in a second, you want him to be able to move off with the bait without feeling any resistance. The colder the water, the more important that is, okay? When the water's really cold, a big 20, 25 pound striper, sometimes they'll just come in and they'll just go, that's it. The bite started. 30 seconds will pass. They're lethargic, they're cold. So it's important that they be able to pull line off the reel without feeling any resistance. That way you can play out your strikes and hook the maximum amount of fish. You get the maximum amount of hookups from your bites, all right? Typically when the water is 50 degrees or more, I'll let the fish take it until they're running pretty good. Then I'll pick up the rod, thumb the reel, throw it into gear, let the line come tight, fish on, you got them. Let's look at end tackle. We'll finish up talking about baits, and we'll talk a little bit about the tides, because tides are important when you're out in the Delta. So I kind of got these, this is kind of hokey. I've set up 2 basic bait fishing rigs. I just use the end of a fishing rod here just to kind of keep track of things. But I'm going to show you how to set up for bait fishing. You use a sliding sinker rig in the Delta 99% of the time when you're bait fishing. So here's what we got. This is the main line. This is the braided line. Let me get this hook off here. Let's see here. So what I've set up there, I've set up a sliding sinker rig. Now they sell those plastic sliding sleeves out in the Delta. You can get them, they're very convenient. But I've been doing it like this for quite a while and I like it really well. Take your main line, you put it through a bead, then you put on a snap swivel, then you put on a couple more beads because you're gonna hang your sinker off that snap swivel right there. That can move freely up and down the line. Those extra beads there keep things from getting tangled up. You're going to tip the line with a snap swivel, and that's where you're going to attach your leader. And you're basically going to use one of two types of leaders when you're out there in the Delta. This leader is short. I usually use about 36 inches of leader material, but I didn't want to be dealing with a big long piece of line here. So your leader, it just has a loop in the top that you're going to snap into the snap swivel, and it's tipped with a hook. Again, 25-pound copolymer. They're not line shy. Use the P-Line CXX, Trilene big game line. You want something that can take some abrasion down there. You want some tough line. Okay, for fishing cut baits, number one bait, shad, or things like sardines, a fillet of pike minnow, stuff like that. You want a big hook. That is a 10-aught river hook right there. All right, you can use an octopus. I like the river hooks. A little bass will get that hook in their mouth no problem, but what the big hook really does is it prevents the little tiny fish from swallowing the hook and getting themselves in trouble. So they're not hook shy. They can see a lot of that hook sticking out of the bait. They don't care. So this is the kind of rig that you're going to fish your filleted shad on. If you don't know how to rig a filleted shad, ask at the bait shop. They will demonstrate to you how to do it properly. But filleted shad, that's number one bait. Sardine fillets work great. If you catch a pike minnow, by all means fillet that. They will hit that pike minnow meat. They like it a lot. So that's your basic cut bait rig. Now, if you're going to be fishing live baits, if you're going to go out and buy some bullheads, some mud suckers, maybe you're going to catch some bluegill and use those. Maybe you're going to catch some split tails, which is a big minnow that lives in the Delta. Maybe you're going to catch some of those and use those for bait. The leader is basically the same. It's hooked on the same rig. It's hooked on a sliding sinker rig. Still 25-pound copolymer line, CXX right there. But what I've got it rigged up with is a good size live bait style hook. Okay, so this hook is a little lighter than that big giant river hook because we're using live bait. We want the fish to be able to swim around a little bit. And rather than having that hook tied directly to the end of the line, I've rigged it on a perfection loop knot just to give that bait fish some freedom of movement. Up here, got a loop in it. I'll put my bait on, snap it on that snap swivel, cast it out there, whether I'm fishing cut bait or live bait, and put the rod in the holder, or better yet, a rod balancer. I'm going to put the clicker on, I'm going to take the reel out of gear, and now the wading begins. And you don't need, in terms of sinkers, I fish shallow. Your most active bass are always going to be in shallow water 90% of the time. So I use sinkers that are anywhere from 1 to 3 ounces most of the time. I'm not a guy that sits out in 20, 30 feet of water very often. You see a lot of bass out there. Lots of times those fish aren't biters. I like to fish shallow. 2 feet, 3 feet, 6 feet, 9 feet. That's where I've caught most of my big bass on baits. So, I'm using a 1 to 3 ounce sinker. That's pretty much all I use. I'll use a torpedo like that. I like those round river sinkers better. They come through the water with very little resistance, but they're flat and they tend not to walk around in the tide, in the current. So let's finish up by considering the tide, okay? I don't care if it's incoming or outgoing. Doesn't matter to me. All right, but I will say this: the bite is always most intense during the last hour of one tide and the first hour of the next tide. Now, if the bite's good, if you're out there and it's a good day, you might get bites all the way through the tide. If you get out there and it's a slow day, you might only get bites during that prime time, the last hour and the first hour of the tides, okay? So it's important that you're in an area during that prime time that's holding fish. Last hour of the tide is not the time to be cruising around looking for fish. You need to time your trip to give yourself some time. If you don't know where there's some fish located, you get out there and find some marks on your sonar, and you need to be in those fish holding areas during that prime part of the tide. You can troll during slack water. That works just fine. Bait fishing's a little sketchy during slack water because you lose the current and the boat wants to turn on the anchor all the time. but that's just part of it. You can wait it out. You can move up or down the system and catch the tide again. That's kind of up to you. That's some of the ropes you're going to learn. But that's pretty much it, guys. That is a very solid starting position on your Delta striper fishing career. I know there's a lot of info there, but those are the setbacks, the speeds, and the proper rigging on the plugs. Those are the leaders and the end tackle you're going to use when bait fishing. If you're bait fishing, keep it shallow. Shallow is better than deep, in my opinion, most of the time. I've caught a lot more stripers in less than 15 feet of water in the Delta than I have in water that's deeper than 15 feet. Your mileage may vary on that note, but that's what I found. And I spend a lot of time out there fishing with a lot of super talented anglers, including Mark Wilson, Clyde Wands, Barry Canavero, and the list goes on and on, Captain David Hammond. And, you know, I learned from some of the best, and I've spent my fair share of time out there as well. Anyway, that's a wrap, guys. That's going to take you down the road to striper fishing success this fall in the Delta. And if you are looking for the #1 rod in Northern California for salmon, stripers, and halibut, get on over to fishhuntshoot.com, grab one of my rods, and we'll throw in those complimentary lures. I'm Kel Kellogg. You have a wonderful day.